In this knife talk video, we're going to be taking a look at Great Eastern Cutlery and Charlie Campagna's TC Ancient Barlows and looking at what makes them unique and everything like that. So first of all, this is the most recent TC Ancient Barlow. It was run alongside the general run of GEC's number 15 frame. And it's a special factory order for Charlie Campagna, like I said. So Charlie Campagna owns or I think it's more of a gentleman's agreement. I don't know if he owns it, but he's the designer and kind of leads the direction of the TC Barlows. So first of all, one thing that I've been seeing, it's kind of a general thing that you see quite a bit. People call it a Tom's Choice Barlow. Tom's Choice was a specific one of the TC Barlows. The TC on the bolster actually refers to Titty Cutlery. And the tube literature is always interesting on Charlie's knives, but especially so on these ancient Barlows. So if you would like to pause the video and read through this, it's definitely interesting, and he actually goes into kind of the history of Barlows a little bit. So to go over it real quick, Barlows were a knife that was made to be a good using knife, inexpensive, well made, but with less frills. So he talks about how sometimes there'd be something like a line like this, but no, fancy slanted bolsters and things like that. The bolster is the biggest thing that denotes a Barlow knife. It's usually at least a third of the length of the frame of the knife. So it's an elongated steel bolster, usually steel, sometimes aluminum, sometimes brass, that's supposed to make the pivot stronger, a little bit sturdier. And they usually were either single blade or a main blade with a pen, sometimes two blade, but more so single blade, just to keep the cost low, with usually simple bone handles, sometimes, as he talks about on here, scratted, so rather than jigged, taking the time to do intricate jigging, just basically scratching lines into it to make it a little bit more grippy. So that's interesting. Talks about why he does the ancient Barlows. And to talk about that for a second, what's the difference between a TC ancient Barlow and a normal TC Barlow? So this one's actually pretty old and is starting to look a little bit more like the TC ancient Barlows, but this came as a normal TC Barlow. And you'll notice that the bolster is polished. I mean, this one has a good bit of patina. The blade is a normal sheet foot on this one. This one was smooth ivory bone that I dyed black. So kind of a nice, again, still a simple Barlow, but these ones are, one, based off of characteristics of some of Charlie's vintage Barlows, and two, they are unfinished in a similar fashion to a Barlow might have been even before the turn of the 20th century. So the first one was a kind of an elongated coping blade. And now to show the difference between a coping blade and a sheepfoot blade, you can see here that the hump above where the tip comes to is different. So on a sheepfoot blade, it's rounded. Okay, the cutoff does go almost vertical, but it's rounded. And then it's pretty much the same height at the kick as it is at the tip. Okay, a coping blade, again, is about the same height at the kick as it is at the tip, but that hump is less rounded. So this one is ever so slightly rounded, so it's not a true coping blade. It's kind of hard to name this blade, and you'll see that that's true for the other one also. But it's closest, I'd say, to a coping blade, or maybe a modified sheepfoot. But definitely I would call it an elongated coping or very modified sheepfoot. Now, I don't have a lamb's foot, but I think some people called this a lamb's foot because it is a little bit less height or width of the blade from bottom to top at the tip than it is at the kick, which is one of the characteristics of a lamb's foot blade. So putting all that together, the blade on this knife is pretty unusual. It's not one that you see really on any other knives. except for maybe as a secondary blade and, you know, less long and everything. So that's one of the kind of big characteristics aside from the less finishing of the ancient TC Barlows. So this one's tang stamp is 15C115. So that means it's a 15 pattern. Then the next one should be a number for the blade shape. So for example, again here, it's a 3, which means a sheep foot blade. But they decided to use a C. Let's see if you can see it better here. Yeah, a C for this one, for Charlie, or maybe for coping. I'm not exactly sure. I think it is for Charlie, or Compania. And then 1 is 1 blade, and it was made in 2015. So kind of a different blade shape, hasn't been used on any other Great Eastern Cutlery knives. One thing that's interesting about this blade shape, and this is the second one of these I believe I've had, is that it's not totally straight, I don't think. This isn't a perfect way to show this, but if you can see it there, maybe it's less than I think, but it does seem to have a little bit of an upward curve here in the center. Now that might just be my eyes deceiving me, but I thought that on the first one of these that I had also. It has a long swedge here, which you'll see the newer version does also. But then one cool thing that this one has is that it has a stamp on the blade rather than an etch, which a lot of Great Eastern Cutlery knives have an etch. This has a stamp, and it's CC, which stands for Charlie Compania, and then a little kind of a head, and then some barley or wheat branches, and then 3 legs coming off of the head. Really tough to see, it's very small, but that's what that is in the center there, and that's the symbol of Sicily, which Charlie Compania's family is Sicilian, so that's what he went with there. But some things that they both share are kind of less finished on the bolsters. Now for this first run, which was kind of like an experimental run, they didn't go quite as far for the ancient aesthetic as they did on the new run. You can see there's still some scale left from the stamping process, which, you know, gives it kind of a patina, but it does have kind of a polished look around the actual pivot and everything like that. The handle that this one originally came with was scratted parchment bone. That's what I originally had this knife covered in. This one I just traded into. I kind of, you know, I've sold a lot of knives that I wish I hadn't, and I sold a parchment bone original TC Ancient. But I got this one in a trade because I wanted to, you know, wanted to compare the new Ancient to. And the original scratted parchment bone was basically a parchment colored bone, so kind of like a little bit more tan than GEC's ivory bone, but then with scratting, so kind of like just lines or troughs scratched into the blade, which really looked cool. I really liked it, and definitely I think fit with the ancient aesthetic better than these snakewood covers. So the original owner of this knife, who I you know, got it from, had this rehandled in snakewood, and I think that it's good looking. I mean, it has some cool grain to it and everything, but I'm not sure that it fits the kind of ancient rough hewn aesthetic as much. One thing that is cool about this though is that the spring pins here seem to be hand hammered, and that's something that wasn't the case, I don't believe, on the original TC Ancient Barlows, but is the case on the new one. So this is the second run that he's done. That one, as you saw, was made in 2015. This one in 2018. So 3 years between, and there are quite a few differences. The first thing here is that in the original run, Charlie did a few different handle materials, maybe 4 or 5, something like that. On this one, because people have had, you know, trouble getting them, and he wanted it to be more like a using Barlow, he only did 1 handle material. So kind of gives it so that there's more to go around and things like that. Now, I believe that this one was also kind of made for a wider audience. It has a little bit less finishing, but that all kind of comes into what you can see here. And again, if you want to pause the video to read this, I'll try to hold it here. this one was made to be used. That's what Charlie envisions it as. So, you know, I think that it's good for that. It is a little bit expensive. One of the things about Barlow knives that made them good using knives was that they were inexpensive. This TC Ancient Barlow was a little bit more expensive than this one. Now they are 3 years apart, so that's, you know, somewhat understandable. But they are a lot more expensive than the other 15s from this run. To take a look here, this is from this same run in 2018. It's also a spear point, although the blade is different. I'll talk about that in a second. But you can see here, I mean, it's more polished, the normal Titty version. It doesn't have the elongated bolster, and it doesn't have hand hammered pins, so that might make a difference in the amount of work that it takes to do it. But in general, I would say that, you know, takes probably comparable amounts of man hours and work and stuff. This knife is less than half the cost of this knife, just slightly less. So these definitely are more expensive at kind of a raised price, which I'm not sure goes along with the, you know, using theme of the knife, but still, this is a user for me. I've been using it quite a bit since I got it, and it does really well. So some differences between this knife and the first run of Ancient Barlows. So first of all, the first thing I noticed, and the first thing lots of people noticed, is the bolsters are considerably less finished. So on the original run, they left some of the scale, but polished it pretty well. On the newer version here, they pretty much didn't do anything to them. I mean, I think that they ground off the pivot quite a bit, but they even let the pivot stick out. So you can see where the pivot is. You can see that it's been hammered a little bit to, you know, make the joint tight and secure and everything. And there's lots of scale, really no polishing done, or very little polishing done on the bolster. Another thing, like I said here, originally this knife came with normal pins, like any other GEC knife, like as you can see here. This one has what I believe are hand-hammered spring pins. So that's pretty cool, a little bit rougher finish. You can catch your finger on it, but I've never found it to be a problem in use so far. And then the covers on this one are less fitted to the same height as the bolster. So you can see they stick out a little bit here, which I don't remember being the case on the original TC Ancient Barlow. These are muscadine sawcut bone, which, you know, kind of like a deep amber or deep maroon, like, you know, muscadine wine and everything. So good looking, I think, with the ancient aesthetic, and it's just accentuated by this new blade shape. So this, again, is not a blade shape that's been used on any other Great Eastern Cutlery knife. It's one that Charlie, again, based off of one of his vintage Barlows. So just like this blade shape and this blade shape are both based off of some of Charlie's very old vintage Barlows. And by the way, he and lots of other people that come to the Great Eastern Cutlery Rendezvous and other shows, but especially there at the Rendezvous, have really amazing vintage knife collections. I mean, you can see why people, you know, spend their lives looking for certain particular knives, because some of them are, you know, literally over 150 years old and just still in great shape, look, you know, super good and work well. And that's true for some of his Barlow knives, and they're a little bit rarer because Barlows at that time were made to be using knives. So again, this blade shape is based off of, you know, one of his vintage ones. And this time it's kind of interesting. It was an interesting choice, and it seems like from things that he said online, Charlie didn't know that they were going to do this, but they actually didn't even make a letter or number for this blade shape. They just left a space. So instead of a 6 number model number, it's a 5 number with a space for the blade shape. But you can see the differences here between this spear point blade, this is basically a modified spear point, and the normal spear point that they used on this run of 15s. So you can see, one, that it is quite a bit less tall, less height in the blade. less belly, a little bit more slanted towards the belly, and a little bit more tip, pointy tip because of that. Has a much longer swedge, which is one of the things that I think Charlie really wanted to get right in comparison to his vintage Barlow on this, and it looks really good. It makes for a really interesting looking blade. They're about the same thickness. I think that they are the same thickness at the spine, but it seems to me that the TC Ancient cuts a little bit better. And I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but it seems like it comes to a little bit finer of an edge. Let me see if I can. So I don't think I'm gonna be able to get it to focus, but it seems like it comes to a little bit thinner behind the edge and cuts really well. I've used this on vegetables and stuff like that, and it's done really well. I haven't used this knife yet. I'm not sure I'm going to keep it, so I'm not comparing directly to this knife. I'm comparing to other GEC 15s. But it seems to cut really well. The other thing that Charlie said that he wanted to do with this knife was make the blade longer, because apparently, that's something, the vintage Barlows had really long blades compared to the handle length. So you can only fit so much blade into a handle that's 3.5 inches. And it looks to me like it's, let's see, slightly longer, maybe a 1/4 of an inch longer. Maybe I'll put this on top. So yeah, maybe an 1/8 of an inch longer. But when you go to, let's see, the cutting edge, it's very, very little bit longer, but definitely a little longer. So they accomplished that, I think, at least in part. And it's just a nice made knife also. And that goes for the original run. This one, like I say, has been rebuilt. So part of the nice action probably is that the person who put new handle covers on it did a good job. But it does have really nice action, so very easy to open, very smooth, very secure, no blade play or anything like that, and snaps closed. So, well made. This one's pretty well centered, slightly off center, but I remember that the one I had when they first came out was really well made also. Same goes for this one. This one has a little bit lighter spring, but still great snap, great walk and talk, secure when open and stuff. Nice half stop and swings close. Both of these knives also didn't have proud tips. So some of Great Eastern Cutlery knives, and it's been less so recently, but for a while, a lot of Great Eastern Cutlery knives that I got, I wanted to drop the kick because the tips were close enough to proud that you could catch your finger. Now, I don't believe that that's true on this, which isn't, like I say, from the same run, but it is a little closer to proud than this one. I mean, I appreciate that. I don't like to be able to catch my finger on that, even if it's not a practical issue. One thing, when I first got this, I could pinch this knife. I think now that I've used it and stuff, I can't. But again, nice smooth action, very, very well made. No play, no gaps in this one. No gaps in this one that I see either, and I don't remember there being any on the first one that I had. So despite them looking old, they're still really well made, and that goes along with the whole ancient thing. They aren't necessarily the most refined looking knives, but they're really well made, and if you do take the time to read this, the first ancient packaging here, Charlie talks about the fact that when they were first making Barlows, all that really mattered was the quality of the heat treat on the steel and the spring, and the fact that it opened and closed well and was secure when it was open, because they were made to be working knives. And I think that these both could be really great working knives. They'll work for you to cut most things. Very little things in normal daily life, these wouldn't do well cutting. So I think that they're really cool. I think that it's a great idea that Charlie has had, born of his own passion for the vintage Barlow knives. And I think that Bill Howard of GEC has done a really great job helping to bring that passion to fruition in these special factory order TC Ancient Barlows. And I think that it's just a great synthesis of GC and Bill Howard's ability to make really, really well-made knives and also fit them to a certain look, and kind of emulating the old knives, and Charlie's knowledge and passion for the vintage Barlows and lots of other vintage knives. So I'm happy I got one of these, definitely. I think that I like the blade shape on this one a little better than I like the blade shape on this one. I think that's part of the reason I originally sold it. I just didn't see this as a blade shape that I need. Now, kind of to contrast that, this is the first Great Eastern Cutlery knife that I got, and it's probably the one I've used the most. And you know, how different is the edge really on these two knives? I mean, they're both pretty much just straight edges, and I've used the heck out of this one and found that it cuts pretty much everything I need to cut. So I think that this would work really well. It's just pretty unusual looking, but I think now I do enjoy the unusual look of it a little better. So I'm gonna keep it around for a while. One nice thing about trading into this one is that it is already used, so I don't have to worry about, you know, using it and messing it up and stuff. It's already been used, so I can go for it. And like I said, this one's already a user, so I'm gonna, you know, carry these, keep them, see how they do. Like I said, this one's already doing good, and I'd like to see how I find using this kind of interesting, unusual, elongated coping blade. So these are the Charlie Companion Special Factory Order number 15 TC for Titty Cutlery. Ancient Barlows, one in an elongated coping blade, the other in a kind of an elongated spear blade. And they're pretty cool knives, so I'm happy to have them. So if you've enjoyed watching this video, if you like my other videos, go ahead and hit the like button, and don't forget to check out all the other videos I do have. I have videos on this knife, I have videos on this knife, I have videos on lots of other Great Eastern Cutlery knives and knives from other manufacturers, both traditional, modern, fixed blades, everything like that, over 100 of them. So check those out, and if you'd like to get notifications for when I post new videos, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. And yeah, other than that, don't forget to go out and do good.